have the privilege of speaking with Miss Ayotola Jagun. She is the Executive Director for Oando PLC. It's a delight to have you, and it's always good to listen when experience is talking. Leading with change is a theme. Mm-hmm. We know over the past 5 years, change from COVID, narrative devaluation, which may have been good for some sectors, and now the wave of reforms. What has been key from a leadership standpoint in negotiating all this disruption?
So I think as a company, we're quite privileged because we've always, as far as the industry is concerned, been in problem-solving mode. You know, we are a truly indigenous company, and when we entered the oil and gas space, we came in as a downstream marketing company. But the vision was always to be an upstream player and to be able to compete with the IOCs, which are the international oil companies. Today, we've achieved that. 30 years on, an indigenous oil company that is a major operator in one of the major joint ventures in Nigeria. And we really led the way. We've seen Seplat come on board. We've seen Renaissance, a shift from the land and swamp assets going from the international oil companies to indigenous oil companies. I call us IOCs as well. And that's really pleasing. And it's taken us a while to get here. And we've had to cross a lot of hurdles. We've had to be very innovative. When we were a downstream marketing company, I'll just give you an example. We realized that there was a huge cost of bringing refined petroleum products to the country, right? By the time they come in, there's congestion at the ports. You have to lighter onto smaller vessels to be able to get the refined petroleum product into the terminals in Apapa. So we built an offshore jetty. It had never been done in Nigeria or even in Africa. I remember we had to take our regulators to Aberdeen to see an example of an offshore jetty. We were always constantly problem solving, trying to make sure that we reduce costs in terms of demurrage. We reduce the cost of actually getting the product into the tankers. And, you know, we built pipelines from the offshore jetty directly through the sea into the terminals in Apapa. We had in Nigeria a gas master plan. We were one of the first companies in fact, the only private company to build gas pipelines across the east. We did 3 river crossings across about 4 states. Central Horizon Gas Pipeline, Eastern Horizon Gas Pipeline. Today we talk about gas being a transition fuel, but the infrastructure was not there. We were part of that story of putting the infrastructure in place so that you could get gas to major industries. We have in Lagos what we call the Greater Lagos gas pipelines. Again, before we sold the gas business, we were instrumental in building that pipeline infrastructure, which hopefully will now be taken from Marina all the way through the Lekki axis to the Free Trade Zone. I spoke earlier about OCEL, Oando Clean Energy Limited, and how during COVID, we basically sat down and thought, wow, what's a disruption. This is a major disruption to the way we do things, to business. Incidentally, we were not impacted by COVID from a point of view of working from home because we already had all those systems in place and we're already working remotely. So we just kind of like scaled it up. But we had the infrastructure in place, we had the systems in place. But during that time, we sat down and we thought, okay, what other major risks could hit the world and could hit us as a business? And we saw that one of those major risks was this transition, the energy transition, and the fact that money wasn't flowing into traditional fossil fuels because everybody was concerned about the climate and the environment. And we repivoted our business. We created this company that is into sustainable transportation. You've heard about the 2 buses that we've piloted in Lagos, which are electric vehicles, electric buses. Our focus is not so much on the cars, but mass transit, because again, 80% of pollution in Lagos is as a result of transport. 80% of greenhouse gas emissions is from transport. And so again, identifying what the problems are and coming up with solutions to those problems is the way we've successfully, I think, innovated ourselves as a company.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting is that when you see volatility, it's hard to plan long term around volatility, but your company somehow has driven expansions in spite of what has been key in achieving that. holding on to your long-term goals in spite of current, volatility in markets?
I would say the people have been instrumental in that. You see, an Oando person is a different person. You think differently. I remember moving back to Nigeria 14 years ago. So I've been in the company for 14 years. And in that, when I was coming back, I thought, hey, this is not rocket science. You think you're coming back and you know everything. And coming back, you realize that the Nigerian environment is one that breeds innovation, because you just have to innovate to survive. And I think that's what makes us remarkable. I talked about the Nigerian problem and Nigerians being our problem, but we are also our solution, right? Because if a Nigerian is focused on doing something, nothing can stop us. I remember going to the abattoir. I used to go to the abattoir when I was a kid with my mom, because she used to share a cow with her friends. So we would go very early in the morning, and then I would see how everything was going. And of course, we'll come home and have to do all the cleaning and cutting. My work ethic growing up today was formed when I was growing up. But I remember one day just deciding to go to the abattoir in Agege, and I went there, Okoba, and to just see the division of labor and what people were doing, even with the blood, how they would boil it and then use it. If you want to learn about sustainability, go to the abattoir. You will see how they use the bones and crush them and use them as fertilizer or use them as a thickener or something, or that nothing goes wasted at the abattoir. Nothing is wasted, And so those are some of the things that I would say it's the people that drive innovation. If as a person you don't have an innovative mindset, it's not something you can read up necessarily in a book. We talked about training, but training is all about changing the mindset to begin to think long-termist, to begin to be solutions-driven. And certainly in Oando, as a company, you have to be solutions-driven. And I think that's what will bring about that change. Unfortunately, when we look at education in Nigeria, how much of our education is on being solutions-driven? Or how much of it is just wrote what it is I tell you? If you try and go outside of the textbook or outside of my notes, you will be penalized for it. And I talked in the meeting, I think the session, one of the last things I said was about this stakeholder collaboration, this handshake between the private sector and academia and government. It is so key, particularly between the private sector and academia. If what's coming out of our universities isn't fit for purpose, then the companies have a lot to do in terms of training and retraining. But we've seen that Nigerians can leave this environment, go to another country, another environment where they are, it's an enabling environment for innovation, and innovation is actually rewarded, and they excel. So it's about turning on that switch, right, in the minds of a people that are resilient, that are, I call it a nation of shock absorbers, that can absorb all kinds of shocks that are thrown at it, right, and can innovate in the midst of that.
Interesting. And of course, like you pointed out, don't waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
Finally, this annual Directors Congress, what would you say, or what would you want every stakeholder here, private, public, regulator, to take home from this conference, especially as regards navigating change?
It would be to say that we don't have to be a victim of change, but that we can actually position ourselves to be the makers of that change. I talked about what's happening in America with, I think the World Economic Forum calls it geoeconomic confrontation. Geoeconomic confrontation is nothing but President Trump deciding that I want to drive business to America first. And I'm using all kinds of tactics to make sure that it happens. Yes, we may frown on the method, and we can do things differently with the right values and with the right methodology, but we need to own our future, and we need to own the future that we want for ourselves as Nigerians and as Africa. Africa has been rising for so long, right? And I'm really looking forward to a time where we can say Africa has risen. Do you understand? Rather than being in that perpetual state of rising. But it is a future that we have to be very intentional about creating. And we have to understand that that intentionality cuts through across everything that we do. Education, how we even bring up our children, that mindset shift, how we relate to each other as families, what happens in the economy, how we shape our economy, how we drive our economy forward, how we prioritize long term and are able to take the short term suffering, which we've had to take, for a few years now. But I think we can see some of the impact of taking that pain with subsidy removal. I hope we can see that it will pay off, and it's beginning to pay off. The tax reforms, it will pay off. It's beginning to pay off. That those things that drive the money in, but that ensure that when the money comes in, it's utilized in the way it's supposed to be utilized. That we don't think about we just want to hammer and we just want to, blow. But we can think about it more in terms of, I want to build a sustainable future, not just for myself, but for my generations to come.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So creating the change as opposed to being a victim
of the change.
Thank you.
Or even just responding to the change, right, when it comes. But being able to ensure that we are the ones that are driving that, creating that change and driving that change. And it's going in the direction we want it to go. Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Ayotola Jagun, the Executive Director of Oando PLC. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
A pleasure.